Welcome to the Greatness Garage Podcast, the place where small businesses get big answers. I'm your host, Brad Borkus, founder of Epitome Coaching and Consulting, and this is the Greatness Garage. So, welcome all. As I mentioned a couple comments. One, if you have any ideas, I dropped into the chat just a little kind of a guide to say, hey, share out some live examples, and I'll work through some live examples here because sometimes it's easier to understand this stuff as we're listening to it through other people's shares. So go ahead and either type it in the chat room, or you can just when I open up the conversation space, go ahead and just share it, and we'll go from there. So first, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining in here, and I'm excited to have you all, and really a chance to go through and just have honest conversation. I think a lot of times this one's a difficult one because, well, I explain in the first couple sentences, you'll understand why this is so difficult. But accountability has been one that has come up with me for clients over and over and over again. And it's one that is really thoroughly addressed in the alignment method, because if we can hold others accountable throughout the organization to the values, to the vision, to the principles, to our expectations, then what's possible for the organization is really almost unlimited. And so that's kind of the big focus that you'll hear here. So as we jump into it, the first question is kind of like, is why do people struggle holding accountability? And we have to remember that if you look at an org chart, the higher you go up in an organization, the more people with which you have to either hold accountable or hold accountable to hold accountability, right? And so what's difficult for that is that as you ascend in an organization, right, in any business, the reason that happened is because you just did shit. You got stuff done, you did the work, you stepped up, for lack of a better term, you use your common sense and said, hey, that little extra thing needs to be done. I'm going to do that. I'm going to make sure that gets done. I'm going to make sure that that's paid attention to. In some ways, you learn to kind of micromanage yourself versus having somebody else have to do it. The challenge is, if you look at an organization, the amount of people at the top are less and less and less and less. So you have to understand that the reason that this is such an issue is because people don't think like you. You're the problem. You're the problem because you're so good that the general statistics of people aren't that committed in that way. And it's not that they're bad or they're not good employees or anything like that. It's just that that's not what their focus is. That's not where their aspirations might be right now or maybe ever. And so it's tough for us sometimes to understand that, right? We ask this question, well, why wouldn't they do that? Isn't that common sense? And we have to remember, there's a saying that says, common sense ain't common. And so especially as we rise in an organization, what we think of as common sense is not typically held by others in the organization, and especially the larger the organization in mass. It can be thousands of people that do not think that way. And so that's the biggest reason that we struggle with it. It's, the fact that we then make assumptions, right? Well, I assume, right? I thought that they should have known, or they, right? We create these assumptions that really create a lot of headache for ourselves. It creates a lot of challenges because we think that they should think like we think. And statistically, just statistically, no judgment on anyone, that doesn't make sense. And so once you can start accepting that and be okay to understand, oh, they aren't going to think in that same way that I do. They are maybe not as vertically committed. Maybe they don't want to do those extra things, and that's just not where they're at, or they don't think about them. They weren't raised in that same way. We can start having some grace for them. And you'll see this, that grace is a really huge opening for us to be able to hold others accountable. So one of the things is what makes holding accountability so difficult? First, there is the challenge that there is different ways that people hold people, and I want to say accountable, right? And I've spoke to this several times in the past, but we have to remember this, that for the most part, successfully holding accountability requires specificity, not pressure. It requires specificity, not pleasure. Pressure. You got to tell somebody exactly. So if and you think about this when you're growing up, your mom or your dad. This is kind of a good example where this shows up a lot of times. Is they could either say, "Hey, I need you at 10 o'clock to go in and clean your room, and I need you to make sure that you get at least all the clothes off the floor and everything that I need you to do in this room. And if you do that, there's the reward or the outcome of this, right?" Or they could come in and yell, "Clean your room now!" So one is pressure, one is force, right? And one is specificity. And as much as it takes a little more time for the specificity, it far outbalances itself when it's with its success rate. So by being so much more successful, you can take a little extra time and be specific. And so there's probably some questions going around in your head right now. Go, wait a second. What if they don't respond to that? What if they don't respond to my specific? What if they don't do it? We'll get to that. So the other thing is that when we don't know, and this is difficult because if we're honest with you, I don't know. I just need it done.
Yes.
I don't know how to do it. I don't know how it's going to be done. I don't know what the timeline looks like. It's just we're all kind of ramming trying to get this through, right? And we just say, just go, just do your job, right? And so having vague goals and vague expectations like that are going to make it a struggle. They're going to make it a challenge for you to be able to get the exact specific results you want because sometimes you don't know. And so sometimes we have to take the breath, step back, and say, I've got to define this first. Or at worst, we have to collaborate with them. We have to be honest, authentic, and transparent with them and say, I don't know the complete answer on how we need to do this, but here's the first things I'm thinking we need to do. And I need you to be really aware of things that show up, and I need you to bring them to me immediately. There is not too many questions here because we both don't know. We're in unknown territory. And so that language, that communication probably doesn't exist a lot, right? It's probably stuff we've just been charged to go, to go, to go. Let's go get results. Let's do more. Let's perform. And we're just saying, well, I gotta go. I've got all this on my shoulders. You just need to. And that's not typically really successful. You know, I know we want it to be that easy, right? We want it to be that simple, but it's not. It's not. We're actually taking simplicity and we're actually replacing simplicity with easy. Simplicity is to be as detailed as we possibly can to get the result we actually want. The easy way actually causes more challenge and more headache, and then we have to double ourselves back. So the other question is what it makes accountability so difficult is we have to really understand what some of our assumptions are going into this. Well, biggest one I think we have to ask ourselves is, do they really not want to hold accountability? Does the person truly want to kind of go like, piss off? I don't need to listen to you. Is that really what it is? If it is, that's an entirely different challenge here. But for the most part, they don't want that. Do the people that you are holding accountable actually care? I would guess to some level they actually care. Most people don't avoid accountability for that they're supposed to be accountable to. They don't avoid that because they really don't care or they don't want to. It's that they don't know what they're supposed to do exactly. And in confusion, remember this. This is really important. The most common response in confusion is freeze, right? Think about this, if you're walking into some place and you don't know what's going on here and it could be danger, stop, right? You're going to stop, you're going to look around. In that freeze, people actually would prefer human nature. And remember, we're talking statistics. The more people we have to lead. Statistically, people would rather not make a mistake than make a mistake, right? They would rather hold and make the mistake of not doing anything than charge forward and maybe be right. But a lot of the reasons that we make our way to the tops of organizations are we're willing to take that chance. We're willing to make an assumption that I think this needs to be done, and we step forward in that. So we have to give more confidence to the people that we want to lead. If we tell them exactly, then they're going to have a much better chance of being confident, a much better chance of being successful, and a much better chance of doing what it is that we're asking them to do. So one of the other things is when what makes holding accountability so difficult, and this one this one's tough for me to share with people because it is so important and it's so tough to look in the mirror on this one. But the number one way to crush and destroy any accountability that you want to hold is hypocrisy. We all do it. And we first have to acknowledge the fact that we all do it. We have to admit to that fact that that does exist in all our lives. Do as I say, not as I do. And if you don't model in alignment, they may, under the threat of pressure, right? The threat of being fired, the threat of being demoted, the threat of being yelled at, they may end up doing it, but they're not going to do it from a place that is excited. They're not going to do it from a place that is, they'll do it only to a point. And they're only going to do it with, they might do it. So one thing you have to really remember with this is as you set and hold accountability, you have to be in alignment with what you're saying. If it's important enough for you to say for people to do it, you need to do it. If you are not going to do it and you are going to do something in a different way, there has to be a very, very clear understanding and pathway of why it is done differently. And even at that point, I would say you're walking on very thin ice, right? So as we look at this, there's a question that says, if we have struggled in the past or if we've ran into this and it just doesn't seem, it seems like, everybody's running around crazy. There's a question that says, am I just unable to do it? Or is there the way for me to hold others accountable? And the first thing we have to truly understand in going through this process of like, how do I learn to hold others accountable is to know yourself. Has to be an authenticity with yourself of how you hold people accountable and how you can. Just because you've seen somebody else do it in a way that seems effective from afar doesn't mean that that is the way that you should hold others accountable. Okay? You need to know yourself. You need to know what it is, the way that you like to lead. What is the way that you like to hold people accountable? What is the way that you like to listen? What is the way that you like to understand where they're at? What is the way that you like to hold space for them? Right? You have to know yourself. If you don't know yourself, you're gambling already, right? If you don't know that, right, you're unanchored and you're shooting that off. So it's a very, 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 very dangerous place to be. So the other one is, knowing your personality and then the impact that can have. One of the things that is interesting and always kind of challenging for me is one of my kind of definitions in my personality and my nature is I'm big energy, right? I am excited. I'm exciting. I bring big energy, and that can have the impact with people of empowering, inspiring. They love it, but it can also have the impact of too loud, overbearing, obnoxious. It can show up, and it's not necessarily that I presented it differently. It can be the fact that their personality shows up in a way that isn't the same as somebody else's might be. And so we can say, hey, you know what? This is me. This is who I am. You got to get over it. Or I can learn to understand that the outcome I want may have to be changed with the current impact that I'm having. And so that's an important kind of thing to become okay with, right? It's a process to become just comfortable with. So it's part of the exploration. So when we look at this, one of the questions that we're going to look at is accountability as a tool versus as a weapon. And I'm going to say that again. Accountability as a tool versus as a weapon. I want to go back to the example I said when we're overwhelmed, right? We're overwhelmed. We just got all this stuff to do. And what can show up for us in that moment is our own insecurity, our own struggles, our own ego, for lack of a better term, right? Can show up and be really judging ourselves. And because we feel so much pressure, we can't we can't feel that we don't have the space to give to others because we are so scared about not performing on our own. And so from that, we use accountability as a tool to sometimes almost deflect blame, deflect this feeling of overwhelm, and we say, well, just do your job. Just get your done. You know what you're supposed to do. Get it done. And we use it in these directive ways that don't give people a clear pathway to be successful. And this is this happens a lot. And you can see it, right? It's much easier to say, it's much easier to see it when you're on the receiving end of it than on the delivering end of it. Know that. And so be aware when you see stuff where you feel like going, ooh, that was something that could have been a tool, but that was used at me. One that is common to see that has really kind of gained momentum in the last several years is boundaries, is the terminology boundaries. And boundaries can be an amazing tool, and it also can be a deadly weapon. And so the what does boundaries look like when it's being used as a tool? It's something like I just want to communicate to you that this is something that doesn't work for me. As I'm trying to go through this, I can't do that because of my values, because of certain reasons, because of my limitations. That's just not something I can do, and that's the impact it has on me, right? Versus saying, I'm not doing that. I ain't letting you cross that boundary, and kind of throwing it in their face. And so that's the thing. You'll see people use this in passive aggressiveness. You'll see it in different spaces where instead of saying something where you can actually educate and teach someone about you, you tend to throw it off on them because, well, whatever's showing up for you. So that's one thing to understand is that no using accountability as a tool. Always ask. So if accountability is being used as a tool, it is actually an awesome conversation to help someone grow, to help you support someone else to do their job better, to help give them clarity and peace of mind and confidence in what they're doing. That's what accountability used as a tool looks like. If you are giving them assignments and barking orders, that is going to be accountability as a weapon. Because remember, if we're barking orders, a lot of times it's coming from fear. Sometimes a clear and present danger, right? Like it's a fire, get out, go now. And that makes sense. So there are times, and that's what's difficult, is that sometimes there are places where this does make sense. And you can see these immediate, powerful results. So then what shows up is, hey, if it works there, why don't I keep using it? And the problem is that it is overbearing, it's too loud, it's too much to be used all the time. So that is kind of the accountability as a tool. One thing I want to kind of speak into that as well. There's a book out there by, I believe, last name is Miguel, or maybe it's his first name, but it's called The Four Agreements. And if you haven't read it, it's a really good self-exploration book. It's a good leadership book. It's got a lot of tools in it. But it's called The Four Agreements. And when we look at tools versus weapons, one of the four agreements, and these are agreements that you make with yourself, right? That really help. The fourth agreement is do your best. And it's interesting when I've worked with teams that want to kind of read through that book and implement it. One of the challenges is, well, they're just going to use that as an excuse, right? Oh, I did my best. Oh, I can't do this. I did my best. Oh, well, I didn't show up on time. Well, I did my best, right? And that's a perfect example where, oh, thank you, Zadie. The link is in the bio. Nice job. So as we look at this, one of the things that show up is that is an example of somebody using a tool like that or as a weapon, and they're using it to defend them. You can even hear the pain that they're trying, the accountability that they're trying to avoid, the embarrassment that they're trying to avoid, and they're using it as a way out, as an escape. And so I always say that, like, for example, do your best. Okay. It can be an excuse or a calling in its best way, being used as an amazing tool. Do your best is a great tool, right? It's a great calling. If we want to use it as an excuse, right? Did my best, then we can use it as a weapon that defends us and protects us, right? And doesn't really allow us to grow. So So the last question, or one of the last questions I want to ask, so that show up here is, how do I deal with pushback or people who just won't listen to me, right? They just don't listen. The issue I typically see here is that we started the story in the wrong place. I'm going to tell them what they need to do, right? And while in the end, that is kind of what the accountability has to happen, the way that we get to that point, that is, here's the story, and based on the story, then this is what I'm going to need them to do. It's got to be the last page, not the first page. And so, how do we go through the rest of that story? First is we connect with them. We have to meet them where they at. We need to hear them and hear their story. We got to know what is showing up in their world, what is their limitations, what are their challenges. We have to meet them there if we're ever going to be able to have a chance to really lead them and guide them and get them to connect with what their expectations are for them, what are we're trying to hold them accountable for. The second thing is they need to understand their why. Why am I being held accountable for this? Why is this important? Why? And this one used to really bother me because I grew up in a family and in a business that said you do it because I told you to. That was the end of the conversation, right? And and as generationally we're moving, I actually really appreciate a lot of the things in the younger generations now that are asking these questions. And I even actually started, as I kind of reflected on this, I created a concept called WIFM. What? WIIFM. What's in it for me? And if I can't answer that question for someone, then how do I place them along the vision of our company? How do I place them along the vision of where I see them going? If they want to know what's in it for me, what's my next step? If I can't project that for them, then do I really understand where I'm going with my own business? And so actually it creates a much more solid strategy for the business if I'm answering that question, what's in it for them? And what's in it for them doesn't have to be this petty thing. I want to get paid this or else I'm not showing up. It really can be like, wait, why am I here? And one of the core tools that we have, it's taught in the alignment method, it's taught is our core values. If we understand and we speak and we model those core values, they will end up seeing, and we can explain it to them. I need you to do this because it supports our value of this, and it really helps us as an output. They got a much better chance. Then at least if they are willing, they've got a pathway to go to complete that. The other part, and this is one generationally that is difficult because generationally we never really asked that question. And this is the part of agreement. This might sound weird, but if you're going to hold anybody accountable to anything, they have to agree to be held accountable to it. If we just paste accountability over the top of them and they haven't agreed to it, your success rate is going to be pretty low. And so what does that look like? Does it look like them being able to choose whatever they want to do? Not really. What it really is us communicating through our values, through clarity, through what I'll talk about in expectations, that this is exactly what needs to be done. Are you able to do this? Based on where you're at in your life, based on where you're at in your training, based where you're at in your capacity, can you do this? And for the most part, if we've created these accountabilities right that fit the role, right, they should be able to do them. And if they don't, then we have to have a discussion of, it could be, do we need to modify the role? Do we need to modify? Do we have to have the person in a different role? That might be the part, right? Do we need to find, there are a lot of accommodations that exist for this, right? And it's really getting the right people in the right places so that they can be really successful in doing this. And so as we go through this, if they then agree to it, now it's powerful. So now here's the question. What are they agreeing to? So what they are agreeing to is they are agreeing to the core values, right? They're agreeing to the vision. They're agreeing to the expectations. And those expectations then are managed, right, through the holding them accountable to those expectations. Expectations are the building block of every business. And I need you to listen to this because I use the language very specifically. It's different than a lot of people use it. When you say I expect, we've got to be in the 90 some percentile of confidence that it will happen, right? If we just assume, I could tell you right there, your expectation has dropped to 60 to 50% already. Like that's how successful assumptions are in seeing them come out. There's a lot of times assumptions happen, but your ability to do that, especially when it's a new or dynamic situation. So, and then let me also say this, the an expectation not being met under assumption is catastrophic. So let me give an example. When you come to a four-way stop and you stop first, let's say seconds before somebody else who's coming up is doing it, you have the assumption that you can go forward and they are going to stop, right? And part of the danger in that is that we have been given confidence. However many four-way stops that you've been to, that you've seen this, it has happened again and again and again. But that expectation is not 100%. And when it's wrong, it can be deadly. And so understanding that when you set expectations, you have to know that it's not 100% thing. And if you're going to set an expectation, you cannot set expectations on outcomes. I'm going to say this again for the people in the cheap seats. You cannot set expectations on outcomes. You can only set expectations on actions. And I see that there's a good example here, and I see it a lot in like speaking to like athletics, right? Like, to be on a team, there's 10 things you can do that don't take any talent. I don't know if you've seen that before, right? Show up on time, you give your effort, things like that. Actions, you can set expectations. And I use it in a phrase of internal loci of control and external loci of control. In an internal loci of control, you have your thoughts, you control your words, and you control your actions. You have to understand in the world, you control nothing else. You can influence it. You can influence it intensely, but you don't control anything else. So when you are holding somebody to an expectation, it must be in their words, it must be in their thoughts, or it must be in their actions, or all three. Those things you can hold accountable to those expectations. And then what we do, well, then how do we get outcomes? How do we get growth in sales? How do we get, more efficient? Is that we stack the logical expectations that it should take to do an excellent job or have the outcome that we desire. If your people aren't getting the outcome that you desire, you need to go back to the expectations. And my guess is that you don't have enough detail, you don't have enough specificity in those expectations. And there might be a point where you can rant and rave and jump up and down and be angry. I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to explain them this. I shouldn't have to tell them this. I shouldn't have to have this I shouldn't have to tell them that they have to show up on time. You don't have to. But then you're going to be disappointed when that expectation isn't met. And you assumed that because most of the times they did show up on time, that they just would. And you have now no conversation other than your frustration and anger to address it. But if you had set a clear expectation that they agreed upon, that they knew why that expectation was set through the lens of the values, and they could see the vision of the company, and they understood why that expectation was set, and they agreed to it. When they don't meet the expectation, you simply have a conversation that says, hey, I want to have a conversation with you. As you remember in our agreement, we agreed that our expectation is X. And I expect you to meet that expectation. If there is something that is showing up that you cannot meet that expectation, you need to bring that to me. You need to have a conversation before we're not able to meet that expectation. And at that point, we can have a discussion, whether you need to leave 15 minutes early, whether we need to change, maybe we do change the job a little bit. Maybe we find you a different role that you can be more successful in. It doesn't have to be an all or none type of situation. And so that is an important part to really understand, is that if we want to be successful, we have to have very clear step-by-step expectations. This is where SOPs come in, right? And I always say, if you're going to create a standard operating procedure, a process for doing something, it must only contain actions. Now, your action can be a reaction to, if it's above 50%, you do this. If it's below, you do that. You can have an action based off a reaction or an assessment, right? But they must be action based, right? It can't be outcome based, like you should be here, or that's shooting on ourselves. You can't do that. Otherwise, you just will be less successful in your ability to hold people accountable. And so here are some strategies and tools that have worked for me in holding accountability. First one, as we just said, is clarity and expectations, right? They have to have clarity. You have to have clarity. And the expectations have to have clarity on all sides and agreement. The next part is know yourself, as we mentioned to it. You've got to know yourself through personality profiles, through doing the work, through grabbing a coach, through getting somebody to help, accelerate yourself in the process of understanding who you are. Because there's Sun Tzu, you guys met, there's a book called The Art of War, but Sun Tzu wrote something that says, know yourself, and you will not lose 1,000 battles in 1,000 battles. And really it is because you learn how to pick your battles. You learn to go, where should I be and where should I not be, right? That's the thing, is that, I might be, we were talking about track and field this morning, we were talking about that. And I said, I might participate in the shot put, but I'm unlikely to compete in the 100-meter dash because I'm just less likely to be successful, right? Now, I might do it just for a challenge, but I also am aware that I'm going to be less successful there. This one's going to be big, and this one's going to, if you're really honest with yourself, this one's probably one of the more difficult ones, but model by setting the example. Model by setting the example. And what that means is, do not be hypocritical, right? Do not be the one that says something and does something else. There's a saying that says your children will not do what you say, but they will do what you do. That model that you are setting for everyone around you all the time, you have to understand people see it, or people see the impact of it. The next thing I'm going to add with strategy, I would say, is get curious. Know your people, not just on the level of this is the job and here's how they do the job and here's how I evaluate a job. Get to really, 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 really know them. And if you know them, you will be able to lead them in a way that you never thought possible. And that is really powerful. Get curious, know about them, know who they are, know what motivates them, know what their personalities are, know all that stuff. And one thing I'll say on the personality, you got to know yourself first before you can try to know them. Okay? Awesome. The next one I want to share is one called MBWA. This one was really significant for me and really important in the way that I learned to to lead. And MBWA simply stands for managed by walking around. Now, what does that mean? And really, it should probably say LBWA, lead by walking around, right? But what I found is this, that the best assessments of are going on are typically not going to be through the data in the computer. It's going to be from you taking the data in the computer, putting in your mind, now taking it out and walking and seeing the field, seeing what's actually going on at their desk, asking questions. Just good mornings. How are you doing? How's everything going on? How did that project yesterday end? What struggles are showing up for you? What's going on? Hey, here's our value of the day. Did you know this is the value of the day? And I just want to say I saw you doing the value really well. I honor that. Get out there and be with them, and you're going to see whether your expectations and what you're supposed to hold them accountable for is living. And the other thing that this is really important for in this holding accountability is it will hold accountability. You'll see breakdowns in accountability well before it becomes a problem. Otherwise, it's when it blows up that we're all going like, oh my God, what happened? Who held them accountable? Who didn't hold them accountable? And then blame starts going on, and that really doesn't solve a ton. And the other part, the last one is just kind of imagine expectations. What would it look like if they did all these things? And then write them down. You don't always know right up what are the expectations. So engaging your people to help create what expectations might be there is going to be really important. One, because they'll come up with ones you maybe are steps that you didn't think of. Two, and almost more important, is they now have created their own ownership into this process. They said it, they thought we should do it, and so then they're going to stand behind that a lot stronger. So as we go through this process, what are the next steps to becoming, better at holding accountable, or to help our people become better at holding others accountable? One, reach out to me. We can do a personality profile workshop. Really being aware of everybody and their personalities and the way that they interact is a big deal, right? A lot of times the reason people don't want to do the things we hold accountable for is because in some way we kind of piss them off. Not knowingly, but just something we said and the way we said it showed up in a way for them. Because we didn't start by understanding them and where that is. Oh, if I say this in a very direct manner, they aren't going to like it. If I say this in a very loud manner, they're not going to like it. If I say it in a very soft manner, they're not going to like it. We have to know who it is we're speaking to. The other thing that exists for organizations that I do is called the VVP, the Vision, Values, and Purpose Workshop. And what that does is that it helps owners and leaders create the vision very clearly. And we do that by understanding what are our core values and then what is our purpose. So when we understand our values and then we understand the purpose of why are we here? Why is the company even here? We can then create a vision that is really clear and connected, or aligned, as I like to say. So that's a really important process to, as we mentioned, tying people up through the chain of what this all means. The other part of that, as we kind of get more granular, as I support people in creating what's called the expectation workshop. I take you all the way down from that vision, right, through those values, all the way down to setting expectations for every person in the organization, right? And it can be powerful. And then this is all connected in something that's called the alignment method. So if you're interested in any one of those things, I will, here, I'll do this. I'm going to drop a thing in the chat if you guys want. Let's see, chat. And you can just go to callwithbrad.com and pick a session if you guys want to talk about it. If you want to share this with somebody in your organization, say, hey, I think we'd like this. I'd be more than happy to help you there. So the last thing what I want to do is I would love to open up the floor and see if anybody has any examples that they've ran into or that they would like to share with, here's something I've explored. Here's a part of accountability that I'm kind of struggle with. So I open up your mics. Some of you might be muted and stuff like that. Does anybody have any examples that they'd like to work through?
Yeah, no, so if you two have anything, go ahead.
I have an example of one of my advisors holding me accountable today.
Okay.
Because, we got the process and I didn't go over the recommended services when you're there, but I went out and did it right afterwards. And, I'm glad that he said that to me because I can't expect them to do it if I'm not gonna do it myself. Like you said, you can't be a hypocrite. You gotta do your thing. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate that. That was Jim that said something, which is just perfectly fine. It works both ways, right?
And I will say, great job. And one of the things is the more, this is where, humility or humbleness or just knowing, hey, we all make mistakes. We all sin, right? We're all in that space. The more we can own that with people. And it's funny, especially as people step into a position, if they're not used to you owning that, when you first own it the first time, they'll be like, I didn't mean to be mean. No. And so, but getting used to that being the common nature of the conversation and being authentic like that is really powerful. So great job. That's awesome. Yes, you will find that the more that you are authentic with them, and you don't have to lay yourself on the table of sacrifice, right? You just have to be very authentic and just own it. Hand up. Yep, I'll take that one. Yep, great. Awesome. Anyone else? All of our people are perfectly in line with our accountability and
For me, I think the clarity is I like that a lot because I do get frustrated a lot, assuming they know what the expectations are,
yep.
and then when they don't, and really making it clear that way. The assumption I do the assumption that like why isn't somebody following along what I know is to be? Well, it's just not clear enough for them.
Yep. And one of the things to kind of really be okay with, I've had times where like, why did nobody shut off the lights last night? And then you look and going, I don't have that expectation. And
Right.
so then to channel that frustration, that anger, and say, you know what? I get a chance to make it better now. And I'm going to write a new expectation, everybody. And so the new expectation is that when we leave this room after 5 p.m., we shut off the lights. Okay? Right? And so this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to adjust it. And you may find out that you come in the next day, right? All the lights are still on. Why are they still on? Well, we all left at 4:50. Okay? I have to make it more specific. I have to make it more timely. I have to change what the criteria is. And I'm going to have to be now 5 o'clock or the last person out of the room. Right? And so it can be frustrating, but building a great organization is not just getting it done, doing a bunch of SOPs and being done. I've seen that mistake happen too many times where they have these, like when you see an employee manual that is 2 to 4 inches thick, it's a waste. Nobody's going to read that crap, right? These should be quick little handbooks, quick little things that they know in their role. Pop, 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 pop. These are the things. When I get into a job, I should have a punch list or a checklist that says, these are the actionable things I do. And the fact that we have to add, be here on time in the front, we just add it to the punch list or the checklist. And that's okay. And once we're okay with it, others become okay with it, and we actually create some value out of it. Yeah, so great.
So Brad,
Yes.
how do you handle it when you think you're doing it right, but then you get undermined by up the chain? I'll give you an example. My wife was a teacher at Minot High for a long time, and very diligent. She would give her kids syllabuses so they knew what was going to be due when, how the grading went, very, very specific. And if they turned something in late, if she accepted that, there would be deduction. A student did turn some stuff in, got a deduction, had an absolute meltdown, leaves class without permission, and then my wife gets a call from the admin, and they said, just give her the points.
So
and that happens.
Absolutely. In any business,
Well,
right? So here, there's a couple things that are showing up here, right? There is one, the first one, obvious one is somebody at some level doesn't want to deal with the backlash of holding it, right? If you are going to hold, so for example, we'll talk about this, is when you go through the process of setting expectations, if they fail to meet the expectation, the first conversation I have is called a course correction, right? The second one is a corrective counseling, and each one of those there's an escalation of consequences. Two things
Yes.
have to happen. First, you have to be willing to set that in the beginning, not in the moment, but in the beginning. It says, like you said in the syllabus, it's there. This is the consequence. The second one, it has to be one that you're willing to hold. Now, in this example, the only thing I could have advised first from, let's start with, the self-ownership, is from your wife, I would have said, did the person above that, did they check with that syllabus first? If they did, if they said, yep, that looks great, those consequences make sense, let's go get them, right? Then it's
Yes.
a conversation to where this person has then veered away from this. And this is going to be difficult. If you're in a position where you say, these are our values, right? These are this is our vision. This is what we're doing. Are we also in alignment of this? And does this not now fit into the alignment with what we're talking about? Or is this something that we're doing, or is this an inconvenient space? And so then at that point, I would encourage the person above them. And this is tough because this is humility on both sides. It has to be happening on both sides, right? I would have the conversation where it says, I understand that this is a difficult situation, but I am doing this in alignment with our values, in alignment with our vision, in alignment with the expectation that has been set forth. I know it's painful, but I think we hold the line. And then we get to choose. We get to choose holding the line, or in this example, hypocrisy. And they can choose hypocrisy. That's their right because they're a level above us, right? But understand, if you choose hypocrisy, it at some level erodes what we're trying to build here. And if you're willing to make that choice, I've stated my case, right? And I will fall back in line as long as you've heard me. And that's a lot of times too, even as we're talking with people that are subordinate to us, where we've got to make a decision where we know it's shitty. Like we do not I do not want to hire this person. I do not want to keep this person on. I do not want to do this, right? But there can be, but with our people that are disagreeing with that, they need to be fully heard. And you need to be able and willing to explain yourself through the lens of our values of why you're choosing what you're choosing. Not every decision is going to be cut and dry, but you got to be willing to have those conversations. You got to be willing to be in the fire and be authentic with it. Yeah. Great question. Great question. Because we get pinched on those sometimes, don't we?
Yeah.
mhm.
And again, a student's a good example, and let's just call it a whiny employee, right? Who gets the grease? The squeaky wheel, right? And so what we need to do is we need to grease that with understanding, not with acquiescing, right? I hear your squeak, but here are our values, right? And here's what it looks like. Are you asking me to violate our values? That'll put the squeak back a lot of times in their own court and say, you're asking me to violate a value that we've held. Well, no, I'm not. I think you are. Because if I do this, I would violate that value. And so that's what you're asking me to do. And someone might say, yes, I'm asking you. For me, I deserve it. And then it makes it a little easier to go, ooh, no, you don't. But yes, it doesn't mean that every situation is going to be perfect. But it's really through this authentic conversation that we keep having. Yeah, holding accountability. This is a great you brought this up, but remember, holding accountability is a dance. It's not a thing, right? It's about understanding. It's about growing. Like I'm going to know something tomorrow that I didn't know today. And that might change the way in which we hold accountability. I might be holding accountability to somebody that says 8 o'clock. I said 8 o'clock. And then you're realizing that they're coming from 50 miles away farther than someone else, and something's happening. They have a medical issue at home with a family or a loved one. There might be something that shows up that says, okay, right? We need to communicate before this happens. This is what happens at the course correction. We need to communicate before this. But I can understand that. I'm going to communicate to everyone that you're going to be starting at 8:15 for the next 3 weeks because this is showing up. Okay? But I'm also going to expect that you say 15 minutes later. Is that understood? And I'm going to communicate that to everyone so everyone knows. I'm not going to get specific about what you're going through, but I'm going to say that this is something that we're doing, that they're going to do, and they're going to make it up on the other side of it. And I think most people can go, well, if they're 15 minutes, okay, all right, I want to get out of here anyway. Yeah, they're still doing the same work, but we're making this accommodation. That makes sense. If it's explained to people through the values, they're much more willing to understand it. And it's got to be a time frame. You can't just let them go, right? You got to say, hey, it's understanding for a certain situation, and then it goes back. And it's still their responsibility to communicate before a situation that they can't meet an expectation. So, but just clarifying those expectations mitigates that significantly. So, no. Anybody else? Any other questions? What do we got? I've got time for probably one more. We film. Yeah, all right. Oh, I think we got one. No, we good? I like it. Okay, well, hey, first, thank you all so much for taking the time today and understand that this is a process and it gets fairly granular, right? And this is the support, remembering that the guidance here is the values. And if you say, I don't remember this stuff, remember this. Whatever you're going to do is make your decision through alignment of the values and understand that expectations are about actions. Just starting there is going to give you a really big head start on really creating stuff that, actions and stuff that you can hold accountability for. Remember, we are holding people accountable to the expectations. That's it. Okay? And because we do that, we would expect that outcomes, or we would project that outcomes are going to be positive and in the direction that we want to go. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
I
Awesome.
love
Thank
it.
you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. If you have any questions, again, callwithbrad.com, and I'm more than happy to help. Have yourself a wonderful, beautiful day, everyone.
Thanks, Brad.
Aloha.
Aloha.